The locker that wasn't empty. Mia Torres got locker 114 on the first day of her junior year, and she hated it immediately. Not because of where it was, wedged in the dead-end hallway by the old boiler room that nobody used anymore. Not because of the dent in the door shaped almost like a fist. She hated it because of the smell. It was faint at first, something like wet pennies and old flowers. She told herself it was probably a forgotten gym sock or a lunch someone left to rot over summer. She sprayed perfume inside, propped the door, opened between classes, and moved on with her life. That first week, she also started noticing that the hallway itself felt different around locker 114, even setting aside the smell. The overhead fluorescent tube directly above her locker buzzed at a slightly lower pitch than the others down the row, a detail she only picked up on because she had unusually sensitive hearing and had complained about flickering lights before in other classrooms. She mentioned it once to the front office, describing it simply as a weird, buzzing sound, and was told, politely but firmly, that maintenance had already inspected that whole hallway earlier in the year and found nothing wrong with the wiring. When she pressed a little further, asking specifically about locker 114 and whether it had ever been an issue, the secretary's expression changed just slightly. A flicker of recognition quickly smoothed over before she said a little too quickly that she didn't have any information like that on file, and Mia should speak to Mr. Alvarez if she had ongoing concerns about her locker. By the second week, the smell was worse, and there was a sound now, too. A soft, wet tapping, like fingers drumming on the inside of the metal. She noticed it most clearly at 2:47 p.m., always at 2:47, right? Between 5th and 6th period. "You're imagining it," said her best friend, Priya, leaning against the locker next to hers. "Lockers make noise. Old building, old pipes." "It's not pipes," Mia said. "Pipes don't smell like that." Priya wrinkled her nose. "Okay, that is pretty bad. Have you told the janitor?" Mia had. Mr. Alvarez, the janitor, had looked at locker 114 for a long moment, then told her quietly, like he didn't want anyone else to hear, that the locker had been sealed for almost a decade after an incident, and it shouldn't have been reassigned. He said he'd put in a request to have her moved. He never met her eyes when he said it. 3 days later, Mia was still in locker 114, and the tapping had started coming at other times, too. Once during lunch, once faintly during a fire drill when the whole hallway should have been empty. She started keeping her locker shut with a second personal padlock on top of the school's own lock. It didn't help. On a Thursday afternoon, she opened it to grab her chemistry binder and found 3 scratches gouged into the paint on the inside of the door, long, deliberate lines at exactly the height of a person's fingernails, if that person had been curled up small inside, knees to chest. She didn't tell Priya about the scratches. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she went to the school library and did what any panicked 17-year-old with a growing sense of dread does. She searched the old newspaper archive on the library computer for locker 114 and the name of her high school. It took a while, but she found it. A short article, 11 years old, about a sophomore named Daniel Reyes who had gone missing after school one October afternoon. The last place anyone remembered seeing him was the hallway by the boiler room. He was never found. The article included a small, grainy photo of him standing by his locker for a yearbook shot, locker 114, the number faintly visible on the metal behind him. Mia's hands went cold. She read the article 3 more times, memorizing every detail. The date, October 14th, a Friday, the same day of the week it now was. She checked the small calendar app on her phone with shaking fingers. It was October 13th. Tomorrow would mark 11 years exactly since Daniel Reyes had vanished from that hallway. She thought about telling someone official, a real adult with real authority, but she could already hear how it would sound out loud. A locker smells bad. A locker makes noise. A locker has scratches in the paint. None of it added up to anything a police report could use. She printed the newspaper article anyway and folded it into her binder, as if having it on paper might somehow make it more real, more actionable, more hers to do something about. That night she barely slept. She kept replaying Mr. Alvarez's face, the way he hadn't met her eyes, the way he'd said, reassigned like it was. A mistake somebody should have caught years ago and never had. She wondered how many other students had sat exactly where she was, sitting now, turning the same facts over and over, before quietly deciding it was easier to just avoid the locker and move on with their lives. She avoided her locker after that. She carried her books in her backpack, all of them, every day, even though her shoulders ached under the weight. For 2 weeks, nothing happened, and she started to think that maybe distance was enough. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, the vice principal announced over the intercom that a storage issue meant several students would need to be temporarily reassigned lockers, and Mia, of course, was one of them. Her new locker was 115, right next door. That first day at 115, she heard the tapping again, muffled through the shared wall. At 2:47 exactly, she stood frozen in the hallway, alone. The fire drill schedule had been changed that week, so the halls were unusually empty, and she listened as the tapping grew faster, more frantic, like something was trying to get her attention. Then a voice, small, a boy's voice, cracked with age it shouldn't have, had, coming from inside locker 114. Is she gone yet? Mia didn't answer. She couldn't have, even if she'd wanted to. Her throat had locked shut. Is she gone yet? The voice said again, closer to the door now, right up against the metal. I don't want her to see me like this. Mia ran. She didn't stop until she reached the front office, where she told the secretary in a shaking voice that she needed to go home sick. Nobody asked questions. Nobody ever does when a student looks like they've seen something they shouldn't have. She never went back to locker 115 either. She spent the rest of the semester keeping her things in her car, walking to and from the parking lot 4 times a day rather than risk being anywhere near that hallway. Years later, long after she'd graduated, Mia drove past the school on a whim, curious whether the building had changed at all. It hadn't. The dead-end hallway was still there, though the windows were dark. She learned through an old classmate on social media that the school had finally closed off that hallway for renovations the year after she left, and that during the demolition, workers found something sealed behind the boiler room wall, wedged into a gap barely large, enough for a boy Daniel's size. They never released exactly what the workers found, but the demolition crew refused to finish the job. A second crew had to be hired to complete it, and even they, according to the classmate's cousin who worked maintenance nearby, wouldn't go near that stretch of hallway after 2:45 in the afternoon. To this day, nobody has been assigned locker 114 or 115 again. Both numbers were simply skipped quietly in every locker chart printed since. Everyone at Ridgeline High knew you didn't take a test alone in room 213 after school hours. It wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't a rule any teacher would admit to enforcing. It was just understood the way certain things are understood by every student in a building without anyone quite remembering who told them first. Jake Bennett didn't believe in that kind of thing. He was a senior, practical to a fault, the kind of kid who did the reading and showed up early and rolled his eyes at ghost stories. So when he missed his AP chemistry final because of a dentist appointment, and Mr. Hoyt told him he could make it up alone in room 213 after school on Friday, Jake said sure, no problem, and thought nothing of it. He arrived at 3:30. The room was technically 213, but the number plate outside had been replaced at some point. You could still see the ghost of the old numbers underneath the new plate if the light hit it right. Room 213 had been renumbered to room 218 9 years ago. Nobody, Jake asked, could explain why exactly, except to say that there was some kind of incident back when the school was called. Something else. Mr. Hoyt let him in, set the test on the desk, and said he'd be back in 50 minutes. Don't leave the room until you're done, he added, in a tone Jake found strange for a chemistry teacher. Then he left, and the door clicked shut. The room was ordinary. Rows of desks, a whiteboard still smudged, with someone else's notes, fluorescent lights humming their usual dull. A row of dusty trophies sat forgotten on a shelf near the window, their little brass plaques too tarnished to read from a distance. Jake glanced around once, the way anyone does when settling into an unfamiliar room, noted the slightly crooked room 218 plate screwed into the wall by the door, and thought nothing further of it. He set his calculator and pencil case down in a neat row, exactly the way he always did before a test, a small ritual of control that usually helped steady his nerves. Jake sat down, uncapped his pencil, and got to work. He was fine for the first 20 minutes. He answered the stoichiometry problems methodically, working through the balanced equations the way he always did, confident and unbothered. The classroom clock ticked steadily above the whiteboard, and outside, faintly, he could hear the marching band running through their halftime routine on the practice field, a small, reassuring reminder that the rest of the school still existed just beyond these walls. Somewhere around the 15-minute mark, the temperature in the room dropped, gradually enough that Jake assumed at first the air conditioning had simply kicked on. He pulled his hoodie sleeves down over his hands and kept writing, only half registering how strange it was for a school building to run its AC this late into October. Then he noticed the second set of footsteps. At first he thought it was Mr. Hoyt, pacing the hall outside, checking on him, but the sound wasn't in the hallway. It was inside the room, behind him near the coat closet at the back. A slow, deliberate step, then a pause, then another step, like someone was moving carefully so as not to be heard and failing. Jake turned around. Nothing, just the closet, its door slightly ajar, the way it had been when he walked in. He told himself it was the building settling. Old schools did that. He turned back to his test. The footsteps started again 5 minutes later, closer this time, right behind his chair. He felt he would swear to this for the rest of his life. He felt breath on the back of his neck, cold in a way that had nothing to do with air conditioning. "Mr. Hoyt," he said without turning around because some animal, part of his brain, didn't want to see what would answer if it wasn't. "Mr. Hoyt." Nothing answered, but the breathing continued, slow and even, matching his own breath at first, then slightly out of sync, like something learning the rhythm and doing it wrong on purpose. Jake stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. The room was empty, completely empty. The closet door, which had been ajar, was now shut. He tried the classroom door, locked from the outside, exactly as Mr. Hoyt had said it would be, exactly as it needed to be for the makeup test to count. Jake banged on it, called out, but the hallway beyond was silent. Friday afternoon, after hours, everyone long gone. He turned back to the room and made a decision that, looking back, he still can't fully explain. He sat back down, picked up his pencil, and kept taking the test. He said later it felt like the safest thing to do, like whatever was in that room wanted something from him, and the only way to survive was to finish what he'd come to finish. The footsteps circled him twice more before Mr. Hoyt returned. Each time they stopped directly behind his chair, and each time the cold settled over his shoulders like a hand that never quite touched him. When Mr. Hoyt unlocked the door at exactly the 50-minute mark, Jake was white as paper, his test finished, his hand shaking so badly his last few answers were barely legible. "You heard it," Mr. Hoyt said. It wasn't a question. Jake nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Hoyt sighed, an old, tired sound. "A girl died in this room in 1987, he said. Failed a test. Failed it badly enough that it cost her a scholarship, and something happened to her after that. Something none of us like to talk about. The room got renumbered so new. Students wouldn't ask questions about the old number. But some of us, the ones who've been here long enough, we still call it what it was." "Why?" Jake managed. "Would you send me in there alone?" Mr. Hoyt's face was unreadable. "Because you needed the makeup test, and the district requires a proctor-free room for retakes on Fridays. I didn't have a choice." "I'm sorry." Jake never went back into room 218 again, not even to drop off homework. He graduated that spring, and to his knowledge, no other student has ever been required to take a makeup test there alone. Since a quiet policy change nobody put in writing the same way, nothing about that room has ever been put in writing. But sometimes, walking past it during a fire drill, he swears he still hears two sets of footsteps in the empty room, keeping time with each other, one just slightly behind the beat. Nobody at Crestwood High remembered hiring Mrs. Aldrich. She showed up on a Monday in October, introduced herself as the long-term substitute for Mr. Petrov's freshman English class, and took her place at the front of the room like she'd always been there. She was polite, soft-spoken. She wore the same gray cardigan every day, and she never once raised her voice, even when the back row got loud. Her lesson plans were meticulous, almost unsettlingly so, following the district curriculum to the letter, while somehow making every reading assignment feel slightly more personal than it should. Have essay prompts that asked students to reflect on isolation, on being overlooked, on what it might feel like if the people around you simply stopped paying attention one day. Parents at back to school night praised her thoroughness. Administrators, when asked, said only that she'd come through the district's approved substitute pool with excellent credentials, though nobody could quite recall which staffing agency had actually placed her. The strange part wasn't her. It was the roster. By the end of her second week, 3 students in that class, Owen, Michaels, Bella Fournier, and a quiet kid named Trevor, who sat by the window, had stopped coming to school. Not suspended. Not sick. Just gone, their names quietly removed from the class roster as though they had transferred, though no transfer paperwork ever appeared in the front office, and their parents, when the school finally tried to reach them weeks later, could not be reached either. Nobody connected it to Mrs. Aldrich at first. Kids transfer. Kids get homeschooled. It happens. Ana Cho noticed something was wrong before anyone else did, mostly because she sat in the front row and had nothing better to do than watch Mrs. Aldrich closely. It started as small observations, the kind of details you only pick up when you're bored enough in class to study your teacher instead of your textbook. Mrs. Aldrich never blinked at the same rate as everyone else, a fraction slower, like she was, performing the act of blinking rather than doing it naturally. Her handwriting on the whiteboard never varied, every letter identical to the one before it, as though a machine were forming the words rather than a hand. None of it was alarming on its own. Ana told herself teachers were just people with habits, and odd habits didn't mean anything sinister. But she kept a small notebook after that, jotting down anything that struck her as slightly wrong, the way you might track a pattern in weather before you're sure a storm is actually coming. She noticed that Mrs. Aldrich never ate lunch in the teacher's lounge. She noticed that Mrs. Aldrich's car, an old gray sedan, was always the last one in the parking lot at 7 a.m. and the first one gone at 3:01, before the last bell had even finished ringing. She noticed that Mrs. Aldrich never seemed to check her own attendance sheet against the class roster, as though she already knew, without looking, exactly who was present and who wasn't, and that she graded essays overnight and returned them the very next morning, every single time, no matter how long the assignment had been. She noticed, most of all, that Mrs. Aldrich had a habit of asking each student individually at some point during the week the same strange question: "What do you think no one would notice if you disappeared?" She asked it gently, like a writing prompt. Most students laughed it off, gave some self-deprecating joke about how their parents wouldn't notice if they skipped chores. Owen had answered that nobody would notice if he skipped a week of school, since his stepdad barely looked at him anyway. It was gone 4 days later. Bella had said something similar about her online friends not noticing a week of silence. She disappeared the following Tuesday. Aina realized the pattern on a Thursday night, staring at her notes, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. When Mrs. Aldrich turned to her the next morning and asked the question, softly, kindly, "What do you think no one would notice if you disappeared?" Sena lead. "My whole family would notice within an hour," she said. "My mom calls me during every passing period. My sister walks me to the bus stop every day without fail. If I went missing, there'd be a search party by dinner." None of that was true. Aina's mother worked 2 jobs and often didn't call for days. She had no sister, but she said it with total conviction, looking Mrs. Aldrich directly in the eye, and something in Mrs. Aldrich's expression flickered. Disappointment, maybe, or simple reassessment, like a predator recalculating whether prey was worth the effort. Mrs. Aldrich didn't ask her again after that day, but she also never called on her, never looked at her, acted for the rest of the semester as though Aina were a piece of furniture rather than a student. Aina started watching Trevor closely after that, the quiet boy by the window, certain he'd be next. She tried to warn him, tried to tell him to lie if Mrs. Aldrich ever asked him that question, but Trevor just gave her a strange, tired smile and said, "She already asked." "I already answered. What did you say?" Trevor looked out the window, toward the parking lot, toward the gray sedan idling at the curb, even though it wasn't dismissal time yet. I told her the truth. He was gone within the week. Aina went to the office, tried to explain what she'd pieced together, but there was nothing to show them, no crime, no evidence, just a substitute teacher who asked strange questions, and a roster that kept shrinking. The vice principal listened politely and told her that Mr. Petrov would be back from leave soon, and things would go back to normal. Mr. Petrov did come back 3 weeks later, pale and shaky, and unwilling to discuss where he'd been or why his medical leave had been extended twice without explanation. Mrs. Aldrich vanished the same week he returned, no notice, no forwarding address, the gray sedan gone from the lot as though it had never been parked there at all. Aina asked Mr. Petrov once carefully if he remembered anything from before his leave. He went very still, and then he said something she has never forgotten. I remember answering her question. I don't remember what I said. I just remember being glad afterward that I was still here to forget it. Crestwood High has had a long-term substitute policy ever since, requiring 2 references and an in-person interview with the principal. A policy nobody explains and nobody questions, and everybody quietly follows without complaint.